So could F1 run a 24-hour race? Imagine if the French Grand Prix was at Le Mans or the US GP at Daytona Road course. Personally, I love Formula 1 sprint races, but there is also something to be said for a longer full-day race with several classes and strategy battles that last hours and not just seconds. Battling through traffic and racing at tracks like Daytona and Le Mans would also be epic. Imagine if they added an F1 class and kept the current GTs and Prototype cars. That does sound actually very good. But would Formula 1 beat the current crop of sports cars? And what mods would they need to make the checkered flag? Big headlights on an F1? Right, before we get into modifying this F1 car, we should see what it's up against. There are two main series for endurance racing right now: the World Endurance Championship, WEC, and IMSA. Now, the World Endurance Championship is the one that runs at Le Mans, and IMSA runs at Daytona. The cars are broadly similar, but the official classes are different. But let's stick to the WEC cars to avoid boring you all. They are GTEs for now, LMP2 and Hypercar. And obviously the only ones that would get close to the F1 car on pace are the Hypercars. They are 670 horsepower to the rear wheels, as well as 268 horsepower going to the front wheels from the hybrid system. And this is kind of similar to F1 in that it can only be used for a set amount throughout the whole lap. Now, whilst the peak horsepower is similar, you F1 nerds will know that F1 cars have way more downforce and weigh about 250 kilos less. So deal done, right? Well, the Hypercar has covered wheels and is much more slippery than the draggy F1 car. And at Le Mans and Daytona, you run less wing than even Monza. Both the circuits have very long straights, something that would favour the Hypercar. And don't forget, it's not just the Toyota the Formula 1 cars would have to worry about. As soon as next year, there are going to be a whole host of teams competing in the Hypercar class. Peugeot, without a rear wing, apparently they don't need one. Glickenhaus, Bugatti, Porsche, and even Ferrari. What's mad is that Ferrari had some spare cash after the new F1 cost caps, and so they are spending it on the Hypercar program. Now, I'm all in favour of more of that. Where are you, Mercedes and Aston? Imagine the Aston Hypercar. That would be absolutely class. Anyway, back on topic. So on pace, which would win? Well, it's tough to tell, but in 2021, Lando got to the highest top speed of 217 miles an hour at Paul Ricard, where Romain Dumas got the highest Hypercar top speed in his Glickenhaus at Monza. And well, that was only 197 miles an hour, a fair bit less than the F1 car. And the lower downforce levels, strictly controlled by the Hypercar regulations, plus the extra weight would mean that the F1 car would be quicker through the corners and almost certainly have the pace advantage over a single lap. And the setup of the F1 car would need to be pretty weird. For example, the Mulsanne Straight at Le Mans is a public road most of the time, and so it's pretty bumpy. Oh, and the F1 car would have to stay well away from the curbs. They are pretty nasty at Le Mans. Verstappen learnt that in the virtual Le Mans 24. The closest head-to-head example we have is back in the LMP1 era at Silverstone. LMP1s are different cars to the Hypercars, but broadly similar. And there, comparing the British Grand Prix and the 6 hours of Silverstone times, would say the F1 car would pull about 10 seconds per lap. But that is far from the full story. You wouldn't expect Usain Bolt to be quick over a marathon, right? He'd still be quicker than me, but... So if you put an F1 car on the grid at Le Mans, what issues would you have? Well, about 30 minutes into the 24 hours, you'd have the first problem. The Pirelli tyres would need changing already. Fitting the hardest possible compound might get you about an hour of running at Le Mans, but nothing on the Hypercar tyres that can do 2 or 3 hours if needed, especially at night. Then about 90 minutes into the race, you would need fuel. And this would actually be much later than the Hypercars, who would be close to their second stop by that time. But the stop would be an issue in the F1 car. With the current regs, you would need a few minutes to wheel them into the garage and fill them up. Really, we would need to bring back the refueling systems from the early 2000s, just to make things a bit quicker. Then after about 2 hours, the drivers would start to get a bit tired. I've driven plenty of F1 cars, and after a couple of hours, your neck is going to be done. Of course, the drivers could train for this, but they're never going to be able to do a full 24 hours. I did that in a sim race, and I can tell you it's very difficult. So a driver swap would be needed, and the driver swap would be slower than in the endurance cars. but no massive issue. What would be an issue is if the next driver isn't exactly the same size as you. Swapping the seat would be possible, but remember George Russell in that Mercedes last year? He's much taller than Lewis, who the car is built around. Let's be honest. And so his feet didn't fit in and his head was sticking too far at the top of the car. And you would need 3 drivers. Maybe even I could get a seat with 60 drivers on the grid. About 6 hours into the race, it's 8 p.m. and beginning to get dark. So now even seeing would be a big issue. You would need headlights on your car. Imagine how weird that would look on an F1 car. Or, I don't know, a head torch on your helmet or something. That will probably do. Now, many of you might be thinking that the engine wouldn't last the race distance, but if you add up runtime over a third of a season, it's around 24 hours. And granted, they don't do this in one go, but it seems doable. So the teams would have needed to start the race with a very detuned engine, negating that pace advantage on the hypercar. But many teams have run detuned Cosworth engines in the past. So I would say this is feasible if you upgraded the cooling and oil systems. 10 hours in, the standard F1 suspension could also have some problems. They replace this stuff every few races in F1, so that would need to be remade to last the full 24, along with the gearbox, suspension mounts and MG UK. But we're not ones to give up, and I'm sure the teams could do this if it were actually a race on the calendar. The next thing to go in our race would be the brakes after around 10 hours. The one thing you really don't want at Le Mans is a brake failure. In fact, despite the GT cars having specifically designed endurance brakes, they actually do a brake swap during the race. This is mad, but they have quick connect brake lines so that they take the whole disc, caliper and pad assembly off all in one go. This would take a long time in an F1 car, as they're just not designed to do this. But presuming all of that, and I know it's getting a bit mad now, you will need new suspension, brakes, a detuned engine, 8 spare front wings after hitting all the angry curbs at Le Mans, 24 hours of insane luck needed for no tyre failures, and finally your tree trunk neck not giving in. And after all that, you would make the flag behind all of the other hypercars. They had been pounding round with next to no issues, drivers still alert and comparatively lightning fast pit stops. Oh, and the FIA would need to ignore that Le Mans and Daytona both aren't grade 1 circuits, but we'll brush that small issue under the carpet. The FIA are pretty good at that anyway. So we say the hypercar would win, even if you had the insane luck of no mechanical failures on your F1 car, and that is a real stretch. Having said that, give the Formula 1 engineers a target and they will smash through it. So if there was any kind of development to get Formula 1 at Le Mans or Daytona, I think they would destroy the competition. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please check out these other videos, which I think you'll enjoy, and I'll catch you in the next one.